Welcome, everyone, to What the Fiction. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host, and joining me for this cool episode on Crash Landing on You, which is a very famous drama, which is available on Netflix internationally, is my good friend, Missy. Welcome back, Missy.
Thanks, Marie-Claire. I'm super stoked.
This has been something that we have tried to do, it feels like, for years.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about it for as long as we've known each other.
And
a while.
We have sort of a plan in place, and we'll get into it. But specifically, we want to talk about Crash Landing on You for this episode, all about how it connects to the myth of the Cowherd and the Weaver, sometimes called the Weaver Girl.
Yeah. And just, I guess, what your point in saying for this episode is spoilers, but we intend to talk about the relationship of this show, this story, to another myth as well, which will be covered in a separate episode. But this one, yes.
And that myth I've searched to try and see if it was intentional, and it doesn't seem like it was intentional. So what I find fascinating is how the same successful show can pull on archetypical motifs of both an intentional myth and what happens there, as well as something that is more unintentional, but still has the exact same level of symbolism.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It is. It's amazing the way it is a perfect case study for both tales. But to your point, only one was deliberate. And I think that's incredibly cool and speaks a lot to the universal psychology that we're always talking about when we talk about these myths.
So we're going to deep dive into Crash Landing on You as it relates to this intended myth. So we're going to talk in detail about different aspects of Crash Landing on You, which of course was this show that was on TVN in Korea in 2019, then was set up for international distribution via Netflix. It is famously known worldwide. It is the drama that people I know who have never watched Korean dramas, maybe except for Squid Game, have watched. And it's been dubbed into a variety of languages, which I find really, really interesting because that just opens up the accessibility to a lot of people. Not just subtitled, dubbed, straight up given local dubbed versions, which I find super interesting because it's a very specific Korean story.
Yes, which is a huge part of what we're going to be talking about in this episode is how the folk tale that this is very clearly and intentionally retelling is a Korean folk tale. And arguably, it only works in a Korean context because of all the things that we're going to discuss. So the fact that something like that, which is so deeply and intrinsically tied to national identity, cultural identity, is something that clearly resonates worldwide. I think that's extraordinary and really worth studying why that is.
Yeah, and that's why we wanted to talk about it. And we're also both huge fans of this drama. Like,
so this was my first K-drama. First of all,
okay.
This was my first. Back when you guys were like, okay, here's the list of all of the shows you need to watch. I was like, okay, this one sounds cool. I'm gonna try this. And then it was an amazing introduction. It's still one of my favorites. It just is a fantastic story and just wonderful. And I do think we have to mention, you can't talk about the show without mentioning that aside from the absolutely spectacular popularity of the show, one of the things that has really kept that going over the years is the fact that the leads started dating on the show, and then they got married, and now they have a baby. And that's incredible. That's just incredible. And everyone is just like, the fans just love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. That that is huge. And
Mhm.
it's so funny because I read about the story. Like they decided to shelter together for COVID because they were really
Yeah.
close friends. And then
Yes.
like suddenly they're getting married. And
Yeah.
suddenly they're having a baby. It's like, oh, they really liked each other. So the chemistry is real, which is
Yes.
also really great. Crash Landing on
Mhm.
You is a story about a South Korean woman who accidentally falls into North Korea via paragliding accident. It sounds ridiculous, but that's what it is. And falls into kind of the sphere of a North Korean captain who guards the border between the two states.
Mhm.
And it covers the sort of high dramatized politics of the fact that she is not supposed to be there and they're protecting her, and she is trying to get back but also ends up falling in love with him, and he comes to the south to protect her from an evil that has is trying to sort of keep power is the best
Yes.
way to put it, and is going after her because she represents something that has stood in the way of him keeping the status quo and the power that he has.
Yes.
That's
The
the high level.
Yeah, the antagonists in this show are invested in the division between the two countries.
Yep.
And that's really, really important. And there's antagonists on both sides. There are North Korean antagonists and South Korean antagonists, and they are both portrayed as very evil. And it's just really important to understand that they are interested in maintaining their power, which is supported by this division, by this separation.
And this is going to go into all of the spoilers that could possibly happen because we're
Yes.
not going to necessarily talk through the plot of the show in detail. We're going to talk about the symbolism and the motifs that are present. So if you haven't watched Crash Landing on You, why? It's the
What a
best
big
show
deal.
out there. No, seriously. I recommend it to everyone. I watched it with my husband. He doesn't like K-dramas. He loved this. He was like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I want them to be get together." Like all of that,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yep.
I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it. It's really available, so everyone should watch it.
Yep.
Okay,
Definitely.
let's dig into sort of the setup of the show. So there were two writers on the show, Park Ji Jin Un. I apologize for my pronunciations already. She's actually quite well known and has done several, I don't know, good dramas before. So specifically, My Love from the Star, which had some you know, star power behind it, and as well,
Mhm.
Legend of the Blue Sea, which also had some star power behind it. So she was kind of a proven commodity, and she was paired with a North Korean defector, Gwak Moon Won, who actually had left North Korea and come to the South. And I love this quote: I want to produce dramas to showcase the unity of North and South through the means of films and culture. So people can feel like it's actually possible. And this is like my jam, like using
Yeah.
art to produce a new tomorrow that we can dream towards. That's like why people love Star Trek. Like,
Mhm.
let's
Yeah.
let's work towards the utopian that we imagine in our minds. And he has an absolutely fascinating story. I'll link to it in the liner notes. There was a really good interview from BBC World, um, all about his background and what happened. But he was actually a Supreme Guard for the ruling family in North Korea, and had also been kind of able to travel outside of North Korea. Is one of the rare people that had done that. Some stuff went down because he had the wrong private conversation with the wrong person, and he basically had to abandon his family, and now lives in South Korea. When he was in school, he had actually studied drama and cinematography and the arts at university, and so he had always had an interest in this. Um, An important thing to kind of keep in mind is that as much as like they really tried to like interview defectors and understand what it's like to live in North Korea and really bake that into the show, it's still not going to be 100%. They actually, most people who were defectors who had watched the show felt like it was about 60% realistic. And there's actually a fair amount of commentary that it idealizes or glamorizes North Korea way more, especially the military, than it should. But I think it's important to say, like, and this is several Korean studies professors have actually commented how it actually does a really good thing, which is we tend to view North Korea as this like axis of evil, like with, hey, trying to gain nuclear weapons or human rights abuses. But viewing North Korean people as people who are just trying to get through their lives, this show absolutely makes them a protagonist in this story. It makes them people who are humanized because they're humans too. And most importantly, in the context of this show, they're Koreans.
Yes. Yes. As a Westerner coming to this show and knowing the basic premise of it, when I saw the first few episodes and realized that the North Koreans were not going to be portrayed as evil or stupid and misguided or any of I think the cliches that are common outside, I was really fascinated and excited by the potential of the story. And I think that's so important that that's what it does, is that it might water down some of the harsh reality, but it's doing that for the purposes of saying that these are people, specifically these are Korean people, and you have to view them through that humanized lens before you can have any hope of healing. And so I love it. I love that it does that. And I can't wait to get into it.
There is an aspect of this show where, like, a meta aspect where one of the military officers actually loves watching dramas.
Yes,
and
love that.
Famously known, this drama has been leaked into North Korea. And to me, like, that's the kind of idea of like, hey, we're taking a single step forward. Even if it's a fantasy, like Guakmun one says, like, it still is good,
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Let's set some expectations about this myth, because I think it's important just to level sets.
Yeah. So if I may, I kind of want to just put this out there because this is really important. So there is a specific Korean myth, as we said, that this is intentionally drawing upon. That myth is it is a shared one across much of Asia. It exists within China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, at least. And there may indeed be many other versions. And even within each of these cultures, there are multiple versions because it's an oral story. So there's tons of versions of it. There's as many versions as there are storytellers. So this is important to understand that on the one hand, it is a shared myth. But on the other hand, each version, and especially ones that are nationally recognized, they are unique. And if you only talk about the shared version, what they have all in common, and obviously, we love to emphasize the universality here of the mythology and the psychology behind it, you have a real risk there of erasing the unique aspects of the story to each culture. And so it can be cultural erasure. And that's something we really want to make sure to avoid. So one of the things we're going to be doing as we talk through this story is we will be referring to the Korean version. But when we want to refer to the versions from China, Japan, or Vietnam, we're going to call that out. And we want to specify that, we acknowledge the difference between these two and what makes it unique.
That could be because, cultures themselves have different emphasis on different things because they exist in different parts of the world. And that's okay. That makes the mythology, in my opinion, way more interesting to
Mhm.
view the different versions of it.
Right.
It's not the same, but modern day telling of Boys Over Flowers or Hanayori Dango is exactly how this plays out. And as it has gone to different cultures, it's been adapted, absorbed, and then it's become richer because of
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And so seeing the cultural differences actually helps us
Yeah.
understand the truth better.
Mhm.
Okay, let's get into the myth.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about it first, and then do you want to do a telling of
Yeah,
this story?
I have pulled a Korean version, so I'm gonna briefly tell the Korean version of the myth. We're not gonna retell all the other versions, but as we go through, we will specify like, hey, there's this other, motif that comes from like the Chinese version or whatever. And so we'll do that as we go through. But yes.
Okay. So
So go ahead.
yeah, the key is that there is sort of a mortal man who falls in love with or the celestial girl falls in love with him as she comes down from the sky. They are sometimes they have a family beforehand, sometimes they don't.
Yep.
They end up going and living together in some way for a period of time, but then are separated from different reasons. And they are able to join back together on the 7th day of the 7th month, so that's July 7th. Although
But it's not because
it's the lunar calendar, right?
so like this
So
year it was like I think it was like August
it's
19th or something
August.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It falls different
it's the lunar
times.
calendar,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
the there's a bridge made out of magpies that they're able to
Usually
walk across. Yeah,
mhm.
it's some sort of bird.
Usually it's always birds, usually magpies.
Yeah.
And the reason they have to have a bridge is because they're separated by the Milky Way, which is like a river in the sky.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
celestial river.
right.
Yeah. And this is that, hey, the husband is actually the one who's taking care of the kids too, which is I find super interesting. The Weaver girl is required to be in the heavens because her job is required by the gods that
Mhm.
are up there, so she can't leave, and that's why they're separated, but they're able to
Yeah.
join back and have a reunion once per year when they're able to. um
Yeah.
there's actually it's really sad when it rains on
Mhm.
this day. This is important too, because it means that the lovers can't reunite because it scares away the birds.
Only in some versions of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing is that like so we're going to talk about these motifs as we go through, but the motifs recur. They tend to be rearranged in different ways. The tears or rain
Hmm.
definitely are frequently associated with this. Whether the tears or rain refer to whether or not the lovers have been able to meet or not, that's again that kind of varies by culture. But it is part of just the recurring motifs of the story. And then one thing that I wanted to point out, as I mentioned, there's obviously a lot of different versions of this. And it appears to me, and granted, I am as I always try to remind people, I am amateur folklorist. This is just me. But it appears to me, based on what I have read, that the Chinese version, which is a little longer, may have split into two stories in Korea because there is another popular folktale in Korea. It's called The Deer in the Woodcutter, sometimes The Fairy in the Woodcutter. And in that one, a lot of the sort of prologue or the early part of the story, which is the swan maiden like capture of the bride, the taking of her feathered cloak so that she cannot return to the heavens. That all occurs in some Chinese versions, but does not actually occur in the Korean version. And instead, it appears that all of that and about the whole thing about the children being left behind and everything, that all seems to appear in this Deer in the Woodcutter story, which ends with the separation of the lovers, but in a different way. And in this case, she has to remain in the sky, he has to remain on earth, and he's always looking up and calling and like, lamenting to the sky.
As the
And he's
rooster.
born
Yeah.
into a rooster and he's
Yeah.
crowing at the sky for his wife and children. So it's like, so again, it appears that the story did make it, into all of these cultures. It just changed, or in some cases actually separated in different ways.
All right. Do you want to do a brief retelling?
Yes. All right. So this is going to be the story of Pyongyang and Chiknyo. And I know I'm saying that wrong, and I apologize. I'm doing my very best, and so I apologize. But this is the Korean version of the Herd Boy and Weaver Girl. So long, long ago, a lovely princess who was the only daughter of the king lived in a kingdom near the stars. She liked weaving silk most of all, so she was called Chiknyo, weaving maid. Every day, she wove beautiful patterns of flowers, birds, and animals. This made her parents happy. One day, when the king visited his daughter, he was surprised to see the face of a young man in the daughter's weaving. At first, the king was angry, but quickly he realized that the daughter had reached a marriageable age. The king called all the wise men of the kingdom together and debated what the best way would be of finding a suitable husband for the young princess. The oldest advisor suggested a certain young prince from a neighboring kingdom who would be a perfect match for the king's beautiful daughter. The advisor praised the boy, saying that he was handsome and took good care of cows. He was called Kyung-woo, one who raises cows. The fortune tellers said that the herder and weaver would be a perfect combination. Kyung-woo's father, the ruler of a large kingdom, was pleased to hear the offer. He set the wedding day. Both Chiknyo and Kyung-woo were instructed by their parents how they should behave as a devoted wife and a good husband. Without doubt, they became the happiest married couple in the kingdoms near the stars. Wherever they went together. Soon, they forgot their parents' advice about hard work and diligence. Instead, they played all day long. That is, Kyung-woo deserted his cows and the cows became skinny. Chiknyo's weaving loom became rusty as it was hardly ever being used. Eventually, the king found out about this and reprimanded the couple sternly. From this day on, you must live separately. I will exile you, Kyung-woo, to the west country to tend your cows, and Chiknyo to the east country where you will weave. The stunned couple begged the king's forgiveness, but they were forced to live separately. The king did promise that only if they worked hard, they would be permitted to see each other one night a year. Because they were so sad, they wept for many days. Their falling tears caused the earth to flood. The prince and princess missed each other so much they couldn't keep their minds on their work. Finally, a year passed. It was July 7th, Chuseok, on the lunar calendar. The one night of the year they were allowed to meet, but they could only see each other from a great distance, crying out in desperation, "The Milky Way is too deep and too wide." Meanwhile, the animals on Earth were beginning to worry about the floods caused by the couple's weeping. To solve this problem, all the magpies got together to become a bridge for the couple on that day. From that year on, each July 7th, the magpies cannot be seen on Earth because they are undoubtedly forming a bridge over the Milky Way for the two lovers to meet. Every year on that day, some rain will sprinkle because they still weep when they must part for another year of separation.
That's great.
Yep.
So one thing I love about mythology is that, especially early mythology, before we had really answers for natural phenomenon, mythology was the stories that we told ourselves to make sense of the world, like Zeus threw lightning bolts, and that's how we have lightning in the sky. And why it's so terrifying and scary is because it's from a god. And so every year in the lunar calendar, people would see this phenomenon, which was what is called the summer triangle to others, where Vega, which is part of Lyra, and Altair, which is part of Aquila, would form a triangle with the star Danube. And this would be over across the Milky Way, which is considered to be a celestial river. The Milky Way, of course, is just the density of our own galaxy across the sky. But it does look striking when you can see it, and there is no lights to block it out. It's really miraculous. But to actually see these stars sort of dancing on the either side of it, and then in the middle of the Milky Way, a very bright star that aligns up with them, and they could see it consistently year over year at the same period of time. It really sparks the imagination. And so Vega is our weaver. Altair is our cowherd or herd boy. And Danube is the bridge between the two. This is explaining a natural phenomenon that people would look up at the sky and see every year. And if it happened to be rainy or cloudy on that night, the lovers wouldn't meet.
Yes. And something else about this is that in many places where this tale is told, it is actually the beginning of the rainy season. So this idea that it is the tears of the lovers which bring the flood. You can also see how, again, the natural phenomenon and relating the things that are happening on Earth to the things that are happening in the sky.
Yeah, exactly. And that's important because nature and how we connect to it and making sense of it is just something that plays in our brains, and giving us order to the chaos helps us through these through myth, through folklore, through the stories that we tell ourselves. So if you have an opportunity to see Vega and Altair connect through Danube, please do. It's really worth it to see them. All right, we're going to talk about star lovers, swan maidens. All right, go to it, Missy. This is like one of your favorite things.
It is my favorite thing. Yes, I know. I love it. So this is great because this kind of marries, two of my favorite stories as always. So I'll start with Swan Maiden, because some people actually say that star lovers, because of how frequently it occurs together with Swan Maiden, is actually a variant of that tale. So Swan Maiden typically is a lost bride tale, and so she is usually some sort of fairy, celestial being, animal bride, and the husband is usually mortal, and he will somehow capture her or be able to take her for his wife, usually through taking her cloak or her animal skin. And so they will typically stay together happily for a time, and then usually she recovers her cloak in some way, or sometimes the husband actually transgresses in some way. He breaks a taboo, which causes her to leave. She flees and ends up returning to the other world, and in this case, the celestial world. And then a lot of times he will pursue her after that, but most quests for the lost bride end in failure. And so typically when the lovers are separated, that is considered a normal lost bride tale. That's how the ending normally goes. And so these sort of lost lovers that are not able to be permanently reunited, that definitely fits into this tale type. And then with the star lovers, what you see is that same story, but it's again specifically associated with the sky. So sky, flight, air, wind, all of these things keep reappearing when you're talking about star lovers. They are always related back to the land, farming, agriculture, cultivation, digging. So mining sometimes definitely shows up a lot. You will find that digging is another way that they can pass between worlds. Even if they're passing to the sky, they will sometimes dig down to get there. That's going to be relevant for later. And then disobedience to the parent is huge. And I want to call this out specifically because of the fact that the star lovers, it definitely appears more than in some other tales, how if they break the parents' rules, and you heard that in the Korean tale, that's what causes the separation. And it's interesting because, again, each of these different cultures has their own version of the story and different things that they emphasize. It's fascinating to me that in the Korean tale, it's really a bit of a judgment on the couple, and this idea that they were not being diligent, they were not doing their jobs, they were, you know, and they were being disobedient. And this is really important, because it's emphasized more in some tales than others. We already talked about the stealing of the cloak or the clothing and the capture and escape of the bride. So you'll see all of these things as we go through Crash Landing on You.
There's also some myth-specific symbols that we're going to see throughout this. They were already called out, like, kind of throughout the course of the telling of the myth. But just to highlight, you're going to see stars, feathers, birds are referenced, the rain, snow concept, just tears, and then bridges. Bridges especially are the most common symbol inside of Crash Landing on You.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really emphasized. And it's interesting because, you know, I had watched the show, and I had been separately, you know, reading a lot of these stories. And I don't know the moment that it kind of hit me that these might be the same. You know what it was? I do actually. I think it was, I looked up the story that she told, because that's the thing, is part of the way we know this is an intentional myth is, you know, aside from the fact that these motifs.
It's in the text.
It's in the text. She mentions it at one point. And so I think I was looking that up. And when I looked it up, and I was like, wait, I've read this story in a book of Japanese myths, and I've read this story in a book of Chinese myths. Hang on a minute. I went and I read, and once I read and started looking at it, I was like, oh my gosh, they just retold the story.
Yeah.
Like, that's literally what it is. So yeah, so definitely keep track of all of these things as we go through. These are the recurring myths that we're going to be calling out throughout the entirety of the show.
And we're going to basically go through the story and catch probably 90% of the big ones that we want to call out that relate to these mythic motifs and what they mean. But we're not going to be re-summarizing the plot. So again, if you haven't watched Crash Landing on You, what are you waiting for?
Go do that.
Come back. All right. So the episode 1 starts by setting us up to show North Korea and South Korea and the border and the river that basically separates them. So one of the most important things that's happening from a meta perspective is that the story is not only being told through the characters, but also through the countries and the peoples. So our Weaver and Herd Boy are the countries.
Yes.
Too. That's really important to keep in mind as you're like watching the show and seeing how the populace as a whole are being considered to be different things. And this comes out like in like the North Korean boys and how they talk about the South Koreans. It comes out in how our South Korean sort of very, very wealthy woman sees the North Koreans and understands them over time. So that's really, really important to view them as not just as the two characters, but as the populations themselves too. Okay. The opening establishing shots actually do this bird's eye view of them flying over the two lands. And the bird itself kind of flies from South Korea into North Korea and then back again into South Korea and sees the city. It's really cool as an establishing idea.
Yeah. It's emphasizing that border. And so this is the thing. If bridges are going to be a significant motif, then you have to emphasize first the border, what necessitates the bridge. And this is it, is that, you know, it starts with really making it clear these people are divided.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it shows how a bird,
Yeah.
through this sky power, the power of flight, is able to cross over and back and forth. And, you know, the border is meaningless to the bird.
Exactly. Îyâxe, who's our heroine in the story, is set up as this fashion mogul icon, but primarily, like, she's established as somebody who creates outfits, shoes, jewelry, bags, a weaver girl.
Yes.
She also creates
it.
other textiles too. She outfits everybody and their home needs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, she's so hyper focused on this work. She doesn't have good balance in her own life, and she has no time for anything else. Like, I love the bottom right hand slide of the little gif of the guy in her meeting who's like, I just want to go home. You know?
Yes.
And like, obviously they're obviously not dating. Like, everybody, like, nobody sees that how hard she works and how much she doesn't even allow people to have breaks, like that. Like, she doesn't have time to date. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's shown as this character that excuse me, is so occupied with only her work, she sees nothing else. And so within the myth, this is important because, first of all, as we said, there is that that specific emphasis on diligence in the Korean version. And what I find very interesting is, again, while the myth itself sees that as a bad thing of like, oh well, they're you know, they're disregarding their work for love, I feel that this actually turns it on its head a bit and says, well, no, in the modern era, we have the opposite problem of she's such a workaholic that she's, you know, she's not caring for herself and she's not caring for others. And she's not, you know, allowing love in her life. And so I find that very interesting.
We don't have a slide on it, but there is the moment where her father gives her the keys to the queen's kingdom, basically, like, basically re-emphasizing that her hard work is what he wants from her. Right? Because she's the one who could inherit and take care of the large empire that they have created from a you know, conglomerate perspective. Her other brothers can't take care of it the way that she can. And so, you know, this is what she's referring to in this gif where she's talking about how she's about to go paragliding, and she's like, you know, I'm not just going to go paragliding and be high up. I'm also going to be very high up. You know, with reference to becoming the CEO, head of the huge conglomerate that her father has run for so long, but he needs to step down because of some scandals he just got out of prison. These things, you know. But as it relates to the myth, she is up high in the sky because she's part of the celestial kingdom. She is an important key part of the celestial kingdom and what that means for, you know, for her.
Yeah, I love it. So then she goes up and she's paragliding, and you know, for a few minutes it's very beautiful. She's seeing flocks of birds passing by while she's up there. Again, we're emphasizing their freedom to cross boundaries, and therefore hers as well, because she's flying now, and so now she's not bound by anything. She can just fly wherever she wants to go. And so the limits are off of her. She does this, but then she's caught in a storm and she's brought down over North Korea. And And so then we switch to the perspective of the North Koreans. But before we do briefly, I just want to mention one thing that I don't think we got a chance to say when we were talking about the creators of this show was where the idea for the show originally came from. I believe the South Korean writer said that she had read a story about a woman who, I think she was on a boat or something, and the boat, ended up drifting into North Korean waters and encountered a North Korean boat. And then they had to, kind of get out of there as fast as they could to avoid an international incident. And this event made the writer realize how close the two countries are and how easy it would be to sort of accidentally slip from one into the other, if circumstances allowed. So while this is not obviously a realistic thing, someone,
a tornado,
without injury into North Korea, right? While that's not realistic, the whole point here is that they are so close. They are separated by a border, and arguably it wouldn't take much. And so I think the emphasis on how thin that border really is the point here.
Exactly. And also, like, metaphorically, how thin the differences are between the Korean people, I think, is also really key. Exactly. So when we get to North Korea, we're presented with all of this bird symbolism. So this is owl, pigeon. John Hook, who's our protagonist, the captain, is called Mountain Hawk, which is really cool. Cuckoo and seagull. And so all of the boys, as I'll call them, because they end up becoming kind of like children to the couple over the course of the story. They all have these like bird names as call signs.
Signs are all birds, and that's we're introduced to them as birds.
So they also have the ability to fly and connect with her because she's got all this flight symbolism too, which is really cool. So she ends up like falling on him because she's caught up in a tree and then lets go and then falls on him. And he doesn't view her as a threat. So he's escorting her where they need to go. And they end up being on either side of a river. And he is trapped by a mine. But this again is the symbolism of the myth that they are on either side of a river and he can't go any further. He's stuck where he is. And she kind of has, because she's a celestial maiden, she has the ability to go in and out of the other world as much as she wants.
Yes. And so it's like the stream is just like the river in the sky and the border and everything else. But I also want to mention that, this is one of those first instances where I want to refer to other versions outside of the Korean version of the myth, where again, a lot of times the hero will come upon the celestial maidens bathing, and he will steal one of their cloaks and she's forced to remain behind. And so, this idea that he first encounters her at a body of water is also very important. And another thing that will come up later is that in mythology, large bodies of, any body of water really, and the sky are considered kind of interchangeable. Like a lot of times the sky is referred to as an ocean. We'd already talked about the Milky Way being a river in the sky, and so they are quite frequently interchangeable. So a sky creature is also a water creature. So she is of the water as well as of the sky.
Yeah, it's really common in Chinese sacred stories and folklore and mythology that like dragons would live in the ocean, but would have a domain of the sky too. Yeah. So it's those sorts of celestial powered creatures have domain over both. So as you were just referring to the stripping of the maiden's clothes, she gets injured and she strips off her outer like jumpsuit. because it breaks and she like it gets like torn open. She's like,
Yeah.
shoddy workmanship. I gotta
Yeah.
report this to the like, how dare my weavers not weave correctly.
Yep.
And they find it. So this is the stripping of the maiden's cloth, the thing that identified her as like Siri of the celestial kingdom, right? Her animal skin. And there he is, and he's got it now in his hands, her cloak.
I love it. This just fills me with joy. And this is one of those things that I didn't really think about it until I noticed it on rewatch. And then I think I was like texting you like, Marie Claire, he gets her animals.
Absolutely. So through means, she ends up able to get back to his village, to his home, and he pulls her into his house to protect her. So this is really key, because basically he is bringing her into his own home and all of those things that there. And she refers to this folklore.
Yes, this folktale is Hyungbu and Robu, and it's a kind and unkind brother tale. And in it, there is an injured swallow. The kind brother heals the injured swallow and is rewarded. The unkind brother breaks the swallow's leg in order to then heal it and be rewarded. And of course, ends up, being confronted by demons instead of riches. So this is the tale. And she refers to it under the assumption that, of course, well, he knows it, right? Because he's Korean. And so this is the first example we have of them explicitly referring to shared folklore, because they are the same people. Because it's not in the telling of this story, the whole point is it's not North Korean and South Korean, it's Korean. And they emphasize that over and over and over. We know it's deliberate because the writers said so.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is really important, and she refers to herself as the injured swallow,
which again
which
is
also
that
means she's a bird.
She's a bird, and this flying celestial symbolism continues.
Right.
And to your Swan Maiden Star Bride motifs, it is important that he basically claims her, right?
Yes.
And so how he does that is that he gives her clothes of like the mortal land, or of his giving. And also he calls out to the village and to the bad guys, this is my fiance, i.e. my bride. And so like he clothes her, and he gives her candles, and he gives her all of the things that she needs to be happy in. And it's like, it's done in such a sweet way, because he doesn't get her a scented candle, because he doesn't understand the difference between a scented candle and a regular candle. But I can't have a bath without a scented candle. What does that even mean in his head? But yes, what are you doing to my fiance? It's such a good, powerful scene. So good.
It's so yes, absolutely. So she is formally his bride, has been officially captured, and so we know where we are in the story.
And at the end of every episode, we have kind of like these either like bit flashbacks or like showing kind of how deep the story goes. And like, this is the first introduction to Switzerland being their bridge. And it's, of course, Switzerland is famously neutral. It's often used as a place that is neutral territory or ground, and it doesn't get involved in conflicts. This is Danube for our lovers in this story.
Yep. So that third star that joins them across the Milky Way,
it creates a triangle.
I know.
It creates a triangle, exactly like the actual physical thing that we see in the sky.
Yes. So this is just it's so important, because again, to your point about them being not just the characters, but the countries. This is a place where they can meet.
And they were standing next to each other, and they didn't even notice. And they see the paragliders. There's all sorts of birds all over the place. Like mountains famously are known to be special and mystical because they meet the sky. And that is like all of what they view within the land of within Switzerland, and like everything that they see, gorgeous, perfect.
Yeah. But
all right, let's just talk briefly about Queen's Group. I did mention it in regards to how it relates to the Celestial Kingdom for this sort of folklore retelling. But this is also really important because in some other versions, the main celestial power is not the dad, it's the mom.
yeah. Yep. The Celestial Empress is often the one who both sends the weaving maid to Earth, and also the one who then forces the separation between the couple later. A lot of times it is her. So it's interesting that even though the father in this story is the figurehead, it's Queen's Group.
Yeah. Yeah, she's the, I think it's the Chinese version, or some of the versions in Chinese that in the Chinese versions that create her as sort of the main antagonist. And even though there is a celestial emperor, she's the one who's kind of in control of the daughter's life and expectation setting, and also does the resolution where they are able to meet once per year, which happens later on in the story too, which is cool. She's involved, she helps. So, I love that.
It's really cool.
So at one point they figure out that the boat to boat, the way home, might be the way that they might be able to get her back. So again, they try to fly her over the water, which is also the sky symbolically in folklore and mythology, but they're caught and are not able to return.
And in order to explain why they were out there themselves, they kiss. And what's funny about that is that's also then, earlier you were talking about how one of the North Korean boys is a huge fan of South Korean dramas, which have leaked in North Korea. And so there's a whole scene leading up to this where he's trying to explain that, oh yeah, well, whenever things get really tense in a South Korean drama, the characters kiss. And he's like,
yeah, really? And it confuses people.
Yeah. They confuse people. And so he doesn't know what to do when they're about to be caught. So he kisses her. So it's a cute scene. It's really funny. It's just a real delight.
And also like pretending to be somebody else's like fiance or wife, like the fake bride, or like, like fake bride, relationship, always equates to love in the end.
Yes.
And so like he's like, our captain is walking into this eyes wide open.
Yes.
Which is also really, really funny. Throughout the course of the show, there's a lot of really cool jewelry, and even when she's in North Korea, she actually has very expensive Swarovski, but they're crystal jewelry, right? Crystals are synonymous with stars in symbolism. They're not only feathers, which of course aligns to the bird flight symbolism, but also stars, snowflakes, moons, across the board. She is our star bride. We'd already referenced how she has her cloak stolen, and within Swan Maiden stories, often she tries to steal it back so that she can leave and she can go back to the other world that she is from. And that happens in this.
Yes. So she does. She finds the jumpsuit, and she finds, somehow she finds the paraglider. Don't look too closely at it. It doesn't make sense, but that's okay. And so
it's fantasy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So she finds the paraglider, and she goes up to this mountain, and she prepares to try to glide back. And of course he comes and he finds her, and obviously he knows that this is not gonna succeed. It's a bad plan. But what ends up happening is, instead of stopping her when they are pursued, he actually jumps with her. So then they fly together. And so again, where are they united? In the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, we're seeing all these recurring motifs. She retook her cloak, at which point in the tale, typically that's when they would be separated. But instead, in this story, he comes with her, and for a brief time, they are united in the sky.
And he also calls out that, like, she basically left a trail by dragging the parachute behind her,
Oh, yeah.
which is also a common motif within these stories.
Yes, a lot of times she left. And it's funny because in stories where he does actually pursue the bride after she flees back to the celestial world, there will often be a bucket or a cloud or something, a horn, sometimes something he rides in. Literally, something will carry him to her. So in this instance, he's saying, you left a trail, I followed it, I am, like, coming with you to the sky.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Oh, so cool.
Yep.
So we get these like cuts to the time that they actually met and spoke to each other in Switzerland when she was in a very dark place. She was about to commit suicide, which again, that it relates to her kind of being in an otherworld state for herself, right? So she was kind of in the ground emotionally.
She was in a death
space. Yeah.
Yes.
And he met her, and she was literally about to commit suicide, which is very, very scary. But he stops her unintentionally. So this
I think
is really,
I think it's indicated that he realizes that she's going to do this, but he doesn't know her. He never really sees her. He doesn't remember.
Yeah, like he doesn't remember until later that that was her. But they met on a bridge. They met in the bridge in Switzerland, and he takes a picture of her. And it's funny because in this case, Siri or our good or secondary female lead, Sodanen, creates the triangle because she's the connecting point between the two lovers in this, and it enables them to basically see each other for the first time.
Yes. And I don't know that we're going to cover the secondary couple too much in this, but I do want to call out, they also have most of these motifs at least once, not as much because they just don't get as much screen time, but they have all the same motifs.
And we love them. Like,
I love so much.
But we wanted to call out the strongest versions of the motifs within the story, which is the main couple and what they represent to like the tale. Okay. So let's talk about the explicit call out of the myth.
Yeah. All right. So this was where, as I mentioned, the moment I kind of realized that this was an actual retelling. And so what happens is she's with all the women in the village, and Sari asks them, she's trying to explain their relationship because everyone's confused. Like, how did this fiance come out of nowhere? And I thought he was engaged to some other girl, and what's going on? And so they don't understand. So she's thinking fast and trying to come up with explanations to explain why she's there. And so at first she references Romeo and Juliet, and they don't recognize that.
Are they Americans?
Yeah, what are you talking about? Yeah. And so they don't know. So she quickly changes tack and she says, well, do you know Kyungwoo and Jiknyo? And they go, oh yeah, of course. And again,
July 7th.
Yeah, here's our second instance of using that shared folklore, indicating again, these are the same people, to show that they are united and that they are one. And so it's really important. But what happens is she says, oh, well, we're like them. We're like these famous, star-crossed lovers.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't be together because of our families and everything. And all the women, oh, they're just like
Yeah.
so transported by this tragic love story. And then later, when she needs help, because in the story there's this military honor called the Preferential Star, and supposedly if Captain Rhea is awarded it, he can sort of he'd make a special request, and in that way he could actually get her out. So that's the goal here. And so she goes to this high-ranking official's wife and asks for help to get the Preferential Star, and again explicitly relates the Preferential Star to the bridge connecting the two lovers in the tale.
To
And of
Danube.
course, there
Yeah.
you go. There's the bridge, the
Yeah.
Danube, the third star that connects the lovers across the Milky Way.
Creating the
So,
triangle, and thus they'll able
yeah,
to be together because it will enable her or him to have the power to connect with her, like
yeah,
from the tail
yeah,
perspective.
yes.
Yes. And
So
in
it's all
truth, it
purpose.
ends up being that they need special powers to connect
Uh-huh.
in a
Yeah,
third place, which is Switzerland. So
yeah.
it's all related and all good, even though it's not exactly the Preferential Star that ends up
Yeah.
happening. It's all
Mm-hmm.
being referenced, which is great. So our captain has left and returned Sodanen to home, and she's not happy with him because he left her. And although they're not like together, they have already caught feels by this
Yeah.
point. So the characters themselves are in this situation, but she lays out a barrier, a wall of beer cans that the her and the ladies had drunk that night. And
Yes.
she's very angry, and she's holding a knife and an apple. Just
Yes.
great.
And she's also like, she lays out the barrier and then she calls it the 38th parallel, which, aside from being freaking hilarious, is also just like, again, we're continuing to emphasize the barriers between them. This is the political barrier between them,
Mhm.
except now they also have an emotional barrier because, she's quite upset and jealous, that now there's this other woman in the picture,
Yeah,
even though she
exactly.
arguably has no claim to him. So, yeah, it's great. I love that moment.
Exactly. Oh, and there's a slight moment I didn't capture this, but I love it when he ties up her hair. That's
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
because her hair is down, and she's like, "This is the style," and he's like, "No, you have that's so unkempt. Like you need to be
Yeah.
kept. You have to be kept.
Yes.
You need to have your hair tied up. How dare?"
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're traveling to Pyongyang to get her a passport so that she can leave finally, i.e., on a plane, flight stuff,
Yep.
flight.
Yay.
And they end up getting stuck and spending the night in sort of a field because the train is shut down. And she wants him to have dreams of a better tomorrow. She wants him to not just kind of be living the life that has been set towards him. She doesn't
Mm-hmm.
know that he has other dreams at this point, but she gets the sense that he's not truly happy.
Yeah. Yeah. The conversation that precedes this is, she's asking, I think she tells him, because he gets all this stuff for her, right? She wants a blanket, he gets her a
Hmm.
blanket. She wants food, he gets her food. She wants whatever. She wants
Again,
all
a
these things.
repeat of the like motif of him like outfitting her as his bride, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
he's doing this, by the way. He's constantly caring for her. He's
Hmm.
caring for, her most basic needs at all times, and so when he does this for her, and he's patient but also kind of getting a little annoyed. And so she says to him, says, "You're a good man. One day you're going to be a good husband and father." And he tells her, "Well, I don't think about the future." And, she asks him why, and he doesn't share much, but we get a little flashback from his perspective where, you see about his backstory with losing his brother, and, how much it hurt him, and how there was a time he had dreams. He loved being a concert pianist, but, that ended with his brother's death and everything.
Hmm.
And so she, without knowing all of this, but seeing his reaction, says, "You still need to have dreams. She says you should still think of the future, even if things don't always go as you wish, or at least that's the way it's translated in the English subtitles. And so she's saying you need to have hope for your future. And what she means is you need to have hope for Korea's future.
Mm-hmm.
And
that they can be like one people again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And throughout the entire show, there's a lot of what are intended to be comedic references to oh well, yeah, I'll deliver on that promise after reunification. Of course, the running joke then being like, if reunification is very unlikely, then these
you never
promises
have to pay up.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But at the same time, they just talk about it constantly. And as in the course of the show, as it goes on, those references do become more serious later on, and they become less
emotional and hopeful and like a promise in some ways. Yeah, it's really good.
This idea that maybe it's possible, that maybe one day we will be reunited.
There's this amazing scene where they end up going for basically chicken and beer in Pyongyang. And she's very sad because she likes him, and she sort of confesses it while they're up pretty high in Pyongyang. Like they're on like in a higher building, and it's sort of like they're up in the sky, and it starts to snow because she's sort of mentioning her regret. She does talk about how this would like shut down the cell phone mobile networks because everyone would try to meet up with their loved one, because being together with the first snow of with somebody is like meant that you're meant to be with that person. And so when the first snow happens in South Korea, it's really, really important. But from a symbolism perspective, it is the tears of the lovers being separated or showing their separation, or the start of the rainy season, effectively.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, great way to put it.
And so, yeah, the snow comes back. Snow and rain comes back several times within this show. So he ends up getting hurt, saving her life, not really caring about his own well-being, which really bothers her, because she's like, hey, I'm leaving, but I don't want you to die for me to leave.
Yeah.
And she ends up being kind of mad at him for a few reasons, but she stitches up his uniform because she's the weaver girl, and sews on a heart patch.
Yes, I love it. So it ties them together in this way, and it's this is something that we will talk about more, hopefully in the next episode. But they are tied together in a number of ways. You already talked about him like tying her hair back, like that's a way in which they were tied together. And now she has with needle and thread, she has tied them together and explicitly made it a heart.
And it's a red thread, which ties back in several Asian cultures to red string of fate and being tied together permanently. It's equivalent to marriage.
Yes,
or soulmates, things like that. So yeah, it's doing a lot of things, and I love when symbolism is like layered like that. And it's like it means all these things. Is one more important than the other? No, it's just kind of how you look at it and what kind of lens you're trying to get from the story. So,
and one of the things to keep in mind here too is that we see her doing this and we understand what it means as the audience, but they make sure that the characters understand what it means as well, because he sees it. And then later, I think Seodan, visits him and sees it as well, and realizes what it means, and starts to realize that they're growing closer, and she's losing. So
they're entangled.
Yeah, they're entangled. Yes, it's happening. So in world, people also understand what
the symbolism of a heart patch on a uniform.
Yeah, you're not subtle, Seri.
Oh no. No. All right. So
okay, I just want to back up before we get to this. So I don't got any images of this, but I want to point out that they share a bed in the hospital
Oh
because
yeah.
she refuses to leave him, and she won't let him lie on the floor because he's, he's injured and everything. They end up sharing this like tiny twin bed. And there's a line that again is translated, there is no need for war when we share the same boundaries. So they're again referring to the crossing of barriers, to union, to the fact that there is a separation between them, but there doesn't have to be. And so I love that it just keeps coming back up even in the script.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a little bit complicated because there's a song motif that is played, and it's actually played like in the soundtrack as well, not just like the piano. So this is a song that he had created for his brother, and was intending to share it with him once he had a chance to see him again, and only played it once ever before this point. And it was in Switzerland, and she was on a boat, so she's symbolically in the sky.
Yep.
And had heard him playing it, and that song saved her life.
Yeah.
So
it's amazing.
She's like, "You're familiar with classical music. Have you ever heard this song before?" And he's like, "No one's heard this song before." Except for, a village and a lake, but who would remember that?
Yes. And I want to point out the two ways that this ties back to the tale. So the first way is, if you remember, when the Weaver girl in the Korean tale, she's kind of sad doing her work, and her father comes upon her and sees the face of a young man woven into her cloth. And so the point is, in advance, before meeting him, she
knows him. Yeah.
She has something of him. She knows him. And so this is the same thing. The song for Seri is his face in the cloth. It is
his
what
soul.
She was. Yes, it is how she knows him. And so so that's the first way it ties back. The other way is, again, if you look at the shared myth, so the Vietnamese version of the tale actually begins with the herd boy has a flute, and he plays it every day. And the celestial maiden the weaving maiden hears his beautiful flute music, and she's just captivated by it. And so she searches and searches for the person playing the flute. And when she eventually finds him, then they fall in love. And so again, like this idea of like being drawn by the song, or by recognizing this other person's soul even before you've met them, it is a big part of the myth.
And the song itself is beautiful.
It is. It's gorgeous. It's really beautiful.
It's really great when we hear it within the story itself. And we'll play into a big part of us talking about the second part of what we're going to talk about later, but not today. Next episode. So they managed to figure out, with help of his dad, that they are able to get her home, using the power that he had all along but just didn't want to ask for. And they're in the Korean demilitarized zone, and there's all of these old houses, sort of like the remnants of the joined nation. People used to just live here before there was a line.
Right.
And there was a mother who was always hoping for her son to return, and there's a photograph inside of the house, and the boys are like, "We don't touch anything. We just sacred. Leave it. This is sacred." And then there's a bowl of water left out, sort of in a prayer for the mom. And to me, that's always been like, sort of the idea, like water itself is both the sky too, in that shared symbolism of connecting and hoping for tomorrow.
And when she asks them why, why, I don't understand, why don't you disturb it? They all say, well, we all have mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a very specific conversation with one of the boys who's been separated from his mother for years. And, it's like he's got a few more years of service left before he can go back to her. And he misses her so much. And so, they talk about this, and then they talk to Seti and they say, oh, well, your mother will be happy to see you again. And of course, this is, we're starting to learn, we don't have the full story yet, but we're starting to learn more about Seti's relationship with her mother, who of course is not actually her birth mother. Seti is the result of a another extramarital relationship that her father had. And so this woman who has raised her and who is the mother of her two brothers is not actually her mother. And so it has created this distance between them. And so we learn over the course of the story that part of the reason that she became so deeply depressed and considered ending her life was because of this coldness from her mother.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, all of that to say that like this is a moment where we really talk about the cost of the separation beyond just the lovers. What is the cost of the separation to these two peoples? And it is families being broken apart and mothers never seeing their children again. And
Mm-hmm.
this is really important. This show is not just about romance. The show is about these people who've been deeply wounded by separation.
Exactly. This one is all you.
Yeah, Seti's mother is wearing furs here when she shows up to try to get into her apartment in order to I'm not sure what they were they looking for, like documentation. Oh, I know, they wanted to take over her company. So they were going to try to find paperwork so they could take over her company. So she's wearing it because the thing is that at this point, again, everything we know about Seti's mother up to this point is she's not a good mother.
Yeah.
She's very cold.
Well, and it
yeah.
falls into the classic like evil stepmother motif at the beginning.
Right. Yep.
But is resolved by the end, which is really cool.
It's amazing the way they do. I love it. And again, it's one of the reasons why I love this show so much, and why it hits me so hard is because it really invests deeply in relationships even beyond the main romance. And so it's just it's very emotional. And yeah, it's she has this distance from her mother. It's a dark mother, a beastly mother. And again, you can see that by the way she shows up in the furs here and everything. But this is where also you start to see the potential for them to become close, because the mother realizes that it is her birthday that is the code to get into Seti's apartment. So even though, Seti claims in the flashback that, there's nothing connecting us. We're not, we're not connected by blood or anything. So we're nothing to one another. In reality, she has, her mother's birthday as her key to her home, which a home in mythology is your heart. So it's a key to her heart is her mother's birthday. So it's heartbreaking. It's really beautiful. And to have this, especially in context of, again, the separation between the mother and the child that we've seen created by the border, it's really important.
So they head towards the border, and he points out the way home, but he can't go that way. He can't go past the line, the separation between the two states. Can you walk me over there? And he's like, no, I can't. And they reiterate like how they feel about each other, and she doubles down on the fact that she didn't awkwardly fall, she descended.
She descended because she is the star bride, and the star bride doesn't fall, she descends.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
yeah.
and they get to the border and she walks across and she's very sad, and he takes a single step over the little little barbed wire line, which is
Yeah.
really easy to pass, that is like the middle, right? The exact middle is this thing that is so easily stepped over. He says
Yes.
a single step is okay. And that's really important to me, because like the single step is the reunification. The fact that the lovers in the myth can only meet once per year is still better than nothing.
Yes. Yes. And that first, that single step, that first step is, it's how it always has to start any type of coming together, reunion, healing. This is how it has to start. And so this idea that he was, even though he said, oh, I can't take a single step, and then he says, well, a single step should be okay, he's willing to push and to take that step, to take the risk, and in order to be united again. And so again, to the point of like the macro and the micro, like yes, it's their story, but again, it's the story of Korea, and those tiny steps that it could take to move towards reunion.
Exactly. We already talked a little bit about how the Weaver needs to be part of the celestial family because they need the celestial cloth. And this is really a key thing in mythology and folklore, in that if you're a god, you control things that are like beyond natural. And when things are out of whack from a nature perspective, it's because the gods aren't doing what they need to be doing. So like if there's a ton of lightning suddenly, it's because Zeus is not doing what he should be doing, and like not sending lightning everywhere. So in versions of the myth, either the celestial emperor, the dad, the king, or the empress sort of chastise the Weaver for not being there. And even though Queen's group doesn't need her to run it, really, like, yeah, the brothers kind of prove, oh, they'll just outsource the management of it to somebody else and he'll just be a figurehead. They still need her there, which is really, really interesting, because like, did she actually need to be there, like realistically in the story? Or, well, they need her emotionally to keep everything stable, even though she's not considered to be valuable by some people in the family at the point in the story when she returns.
And she is really important, obviously, for her business. Like her business is going to cease to exist without her. And it's particularly important because of how she named it, Seri's choice, which is to say that this is hers. It belongs to her. It's specifically her choice and no one else's. And this is just tremendously important that, it represents everything she is. And it's huge.
And like the sisters-in-law were just planning on absorbing Seri's choice into Queen's group, so it wouldn't even be Seri's choice anymore. Exactly. And she comes back and prevents that from happening.
Yes. It's fantastic.
She arrives back and she's kind of going about her day to day, and she sees this kite fly up into the sky, and she's thinking about flight. And
flight. The kite
returning.
Is by borders, right? And so and at one point she actually scales a mountain, which they had seen when they were in the demilitarized zone. They were like, oh look, you can see the mountain from here, isn't that in Seoul? And so she actually, when she's back in Seoul, she actually scales that mountain, and then is looking through binoculars trying to see this place where she was with them before she left. And so even though she's back, she's in great pain from the separation. So this whole point of this episode, and most of the way through the episode, she's quite depressed and constantly looking for these signs and symbols. And it's because it's a severe loss to her to be separated, even though she's back home.
And she hasn't quite like figured out the new way of being. And so when he shows up, it's snowing.
Yep.
And it overwhelms her. with the idea that he's there. And in fact, it like takes her several scenes. Like they go to a coffee shop and then they go to her house, and then like she's still like kind of in disbelief that he's there because she was so empty having left.
Yes. Yes. And so she cries, and it's, especially she cries quite frequently in the show, but especially the second half of the show, she cries often. Actually, he cries as well. Like both of them, they shed a lot of tears in the show, and because they are the separated lovers, and it's just heartbreaking for them all the way through. And then the tears, we'll talk about it in the next episode, but it's also very important for the other myth as well.
And how did he get there? Well, through an old mine.
Yep. Yes. He tunneled there. The tunnel was already dug, but the point is that he went underground. He basically dug his way to her, and that is another way that star lovers will reach one another, is that they will tunnel or dig underground. And so yeah, I love that this was there and that this was how he reached her.
And I think it's important to point out that like North Korea being kind of darker just because there isn't as much electricity and things like that, versus South Korea that is always lit up. Like the streets are always lit up. Siri tells the boys when she talks about South Korea, and you can drive at any time of night without any fear of danger. It's like the idea like there's always stars in the sky to see things, versus it being darker just because there isn't enough electricity. And so earth versus sky is very apparent in just the realities of the two worlds.
Yes. So frequently, even though obviously being the other lover, he does have a lot of sky and bird and celestial symbolism, he is much more grounded than her. And a lot of times, he and North Korea in general are very much associated with Earth throughout the entire series.
Exactly. Agriculture, farming, down to earth symbolism. So the boys come across the border with the military games to sneak in and try and bring their captain home. And they try to find them. They see Siri's going to be at this thing, and the youngest falls asleep in a bed that's in her store, which is so cute.
I love it.
He's really young. Like he's only supposed to be like 16, I think, right? Like he's very young.
But he's definitely supposed to be very young. And he's the one that, again, earlier we were talking about, the one that was separated from his mother and missed her so much. It's him. It's the youngest one that they all kind of treat like the baby of the group.
He's the baby bear. And so the dad, right? So our captain treats them like his little boys. He like brings his shoes and is like, you're gonna hurt your feet. Like, don't do this. The eldest, who's the lieutenant, he tried to give him his shoes, but like he's like, oh my god, you're here, and he gets a hug. Like this is a family. The children followed him basically to the celestial kingdom. That's basically what happened, right?
And this is, and when you think about it, who he is in this story, I mean, he's the cowherd.
Yeah.
They are his herd. He has to protect them and care for him. That is his job. And so I just love that.
Yeah, like per the myth, the children stay with him. That's also really, really important. And so the fact that they followed him there is the myth. It's great. It's great. And then she realizes like they're with him, and she's so happy, and she gets hugs, and they're all like, we missed you so much.
Yes.
And it's so good.
Again, there's just so many scenes in this show where I just get so emotional because they just hit you in the feels all the way through.
We missed you. Like, oh, yeah. There's this flashback scene where Siri's trying to like process some of the stuff that happened to her as a very small child with this dark mother, beastly mother that you had talked about before. And she's left on the beach and abandoned.
So left basically at the edge of the sky, because that's again, we talked about how the ocean is another sky, or the sky is another ocean. So being left at the edge of the water here is being, like, it's basically sort of banished from the celestial kingdom and left here alone. And so that's, again, very closely associated with the Chinese version of the myth. And also there's a line where Seti compares her mother to the sun that never emerges, like the idea that her mother left her at night and then never came back. And so, yeah, there's a chilling night sea in my heart, and the sun never shines. And so her mother, this celestial being, the light in her life, left her and never came back. I mean, and so this is how we understand how Seti became the way she is, and the way that she, she wanted to separate herself from Queen's group because, she had already been effectively banished anyway. And also then, put everything into her company and just didn't want to love because she had been so hurt by this relationship with her mother.
Yeah. And it's sort of the start of it is like, no, go away. But, oh, wait, we need you. Like, that's the myth, is like, right. Wait, we need you to do your job. Like,
right. Exactly.
So the boys themselves all kind of are like, well, I just kind of wish the two of them could run away together.
Yeah.
But that's too dangerous for both of them. That's not realistic that they can run away from their responsibilities, because that's what the myth is, sort of a cautionary tale in some ways too, that yes, people have to live and people have to do what they're responsible for, but that doesn't mean that there isn't hope for a better tomorrow where two things could become one.
Yes.
Yeah. Our lovers become married.
Yes.
This is the best awkward scene in existence. It's so good.
Oh, I love
He's
it
like,
so
I had a bit of free time, so I bought you a gift. It doesn't have any special meaning. He says it means nothing like so many times. And then she opens his hand and she opens the wrong one, and it's his ring, and she's like tries to figure out what finger it fits on. It fits on my thumb, and he's like, no, that's mine. Like, obviously these are couples rings.
Yes.
But like, they're not intending to get married to anybody else. That's what he's saying. They're married to each other.
Yep. Yeah. I love it. It's,
he even says like, pawn it if you don't like it. What?
Yeah. He's so nervous. Like, he doesn't want to admit that he's, intending to marry her. And so it's interesting because another thing that, it's not so much about the motifs, so which is why it's not included here, but it is a scene that I really, really love. It's one of my favorite scenes in the whole show, which is they're both sitting in her apartment and they're getting drunk together. And
they're honest.
Yeah, and they start being really honest, and he tells her that he envisions her having their child and having more children. I think he says at one point twins, and she goes, whoa, I need to drink some more. Like, because he's picturing multiple children. And he says he pictures her having wrinkles and gray hair, and she jokes, well, you'll have to be around for a long time because that's never going to happen. Like,
Yeah.
And so like he is starting to envision their life together, even if they know, at the moment that it can't be possible. And it's a beautiful scene in the context of the show. But again, having that that knowledge that these people, the actors, did in fact go get married and have a kid together. It's like, it's a beautiful moment to watch because it's so frequently we have to content ourselves in these stories with suggestions, if for whatever reason in modern culture, we don't want to be kind of upfront about the desire to or the idea of love at first sight, or I want to marry you even though we haven't been together very long or anything like that. We that's not something that people look at as reasonable in modern culture. But in myth, that's always how it goes. We met, we fall in love, we get married immediately. You know?
It's so funny because I come
So
from like 3 generations of people that like met each other and like fell in love very, very quickly. Like my
same.
grandparents fell in love, fell in love, and were married 2 weeks later. It
That
was,
is so awesome.
it is, my parents met, fell in love, and like didn't get married like until like a year later, but still a
Mm-hmm.
year. Like it
Yeah,
wasn't like they dated a
it's
long
very.
period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And me and my husband met, fell in love, and were married within 2 years.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
not like we met, we were friends, but like when we
Sure.
actually
Sure.
started dating, like we were married within 2 years. It was very, very quick. So
Same.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I actually
We have a
knew I was going to marry him when I first met him, which is,
yeah.
when I say that out loud, it sounds crazy, but I like literally had this thought, like, that's the man you're going to marry. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, no.
And then
But we were friends for a while. And then,
right.
yeah.
No, I get it. We have a very similar story, like we met and we're kind of casually friends. And then once we started dating, he asked me to marry him, not with like a ring, like it wasn't like a formal proposal, but it was like basically an informal proposal, but he meant it. But he asked me to marry him 2 weeks after we started dating.
Oh, wow.
And I said yes, like, so that sounds insane, right? And then I think we married 2 years later. So like yeah, it was by modern terms, it was very quick. And I know many other people who have done that too. So I think that there's you know, maybe not as much recognition of again, there is a difference, of course, between real life and the mythology, but it's also important to remember that the mythology is based on real human experience, and in real human experience sometimes you have that sort of certainty, very early. And so I
Hmm.
love that they put this scene in there, that there is an exchanging of rings, which is very clearly a marriage ceremony, even if the
Hmm.
characters won't refer to it as such.
Yeah. It's couples rings.
I love.
uh, Acknowledgement that the boys are her children.
Yes.
So she comes to the realization that they won't be able to have experiences like this once they leave South Korea for North Korea. And so she gives her black American Express card over to them and says, this is sometimes referred to as the MC or mom's card, and but it's actually the series card.
Yep.
And there's a later like conversation about how like they're worried that they're gonna make her go broke, or they hope that the mean one says, I hope I can make you go broke. Spend all your money. And she's like, that's not gonna happen. I'd
Yeah.
like to see you
I
try.
see you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But like it's so good because it basically says like these are her children.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's giving them the mom's card. She's their mom.
Yeah, exactly. Spent
Mhm.
away. Um so at one point he takes her to a bridge, a very famous bridge in South Korea, to sort of remind her of this moment that they met on another bridge and how significant their relationship and their history together actually is. um and that he's been thinking about this woman that he met ever so briefly since that point. It's so
Mhm.
good.
It's so good. It's so good. They're
Bridges.
meeting on bridges. They're always meeting on bridges, and it's so important in all of these moments in their lives where they met on a bridge of a kind.
The bridges of Crash Landing on You
Yes.
instead of the bridges of
Yes.
Madison County.
So, and as I mentioned, the secondary couple as well. If you watch again, you'll actually notice their first kiss happens on a bridge.
Yep. Yep. And then
So
when she's reminiscing about him, she
she
looks at her
also
ring and cries on a bridge.
on a
Yeah.
bridge. Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love them too. Like I
I
wish we
love.
had time to cover both
I know.
because they're
That's why I
great.
wanted to throw that in there, is because we don't have time to go into their relationship in depth, but I love it very much.
So one of the gifts that Siri gives our drama lover is lunch with one of his favorite drama stars, who's a friend of hers. And she's like, so I've heard that you're a big fan. And he's like, he can't even talk. He's so like overwhelmed. He's wearing this cute little beret with a little teddy bear on it.
Which apparently that comes from another, I don't know if it's the same drama, might be a different drama, but it comes from another drama. Actually, that costume, they recreated it especially for this scene. I know, right? Oh,
because he's a fan.
I love it. It makes me so happy. So it's adorable. And he has this line, right?
Yeah.
Where he quotes the drama.
Yeah. Those who love each other will find each other once again.
Yep. You'll all to each other. Let's meet again. So there is, as we said, there's starting to be that hope for the future, and this idea that maybe reunion is possible. It's really beautiful.
And they stop saying farewell.
Yes.
At some point, we'll see each other again is like, it's not like goodbye. It's until next time. It starts to be kind of the motif, because they don't want to say goodbye. They want it to be something that is not forever.
Mm-hmm. May I mention one more thing before we move on?
Sure.
So another one of those things, sometimes it's difficult to capture all of these things in gifts, and I understand. But one thing I want to say is another scene that I just adore, that is emphasizing again the fact that, you know, in the eyes of this particular show and the perspective of the storytellers, they want you to not think of North and South Korea, but to think of just Korea. And so at one point they're all in, you know, having dinner in like a chicken shop or whatever. And there's a soccer match on TV, and it's South Korea versus Japan. And all of a sudden, all the North Korean boys get very excited, and they all start cheering for South Korea. And all of the other patrons in the shop, who of course obviously are all South Korean, they're all cheering. So all these people together are cheering on Korea. They want, and so
especially if it's anti-Japanese.
Right, exactly. Like, like, wait, against Japan? Hang on a minute. Like, so so cute. It just like that camaraderie that shows up, and and then when they win, they're just, you know, they're cheering and they're screaming and they're hugging each other, and they're all so excited, and it's just so beautiful that, you know, they're showing this is again one people. And in moments it really appears. It
sort of reminds me of when the Olympics were in South Korea, and they competed as one Korean people.
Exactly. And that was after this, wasn't it? Or was it
was after this? Yeah. It was the Ministry of Reunification's goal to do that, which I mean, good on them. Yeah. So there's this climactic scene where Siri gets in the way of our captain getting injured by being shot by the bad guy. And there's no snow when she drives her little car in front of the shot, and then suddenly it starts snowing. Yeah, because it's the threat of separation. She could die.
Yes.
Ah! So like snow has a different meaning in this story than it does traditionally in K-dramas. And it has this like sadness associated with it instead of unification. From a K-drama perspective, if you saw this, you'd be like, oh, lovers, right? But no, it's separation, which is important.
Yes. And at this point also, because he was shot back trying to protect her, you know, when she was trying to leave North Korea, and now, you know, she's been shot trying to protect him, they actually have now basically twin wounds, which is also very and shows up a lot in mythology, is this idea, you know, they're both wounded in the same way. And again, if they represent North and South Korea, both countries are wounded in the same way.
Little Siri, so when she's in a coma, she starts having these like flashbacks to her mom, and the scenario of her mom taking her to the beach, and she hums Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in the car as her mom is like saying like, let's go watch the sunrise together. Like the hope of the sun and being close to that celestial power is something that's very prominent in the wound that Siri has spiritually, but this her humming Twinkle Twinkle Little Star makes her a star bride.
Yes, love it.
or a star lover. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Our boys, as they leave, it's raining, the separation, it's misty,
Mm-hmm.
it's raining. I mean, it rains a lot in Korea, so could have just been like happenstance, but it's really cool that it is raining during this like threat of separation, that they're going across the demilitarized zone border, the inter-Korean transit office, because there is a highway that people are allowed to drive on if you have official business between the two countries, which is cool,
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Yeah.
So as they approach the border, the boys look around and there's a flight of birds
Mm-hmm.
that is flying above them, right? Showing birds have no borders like we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. It's and the flight always brings them together. Um, yeah, and then it's the fact that they have already crossed over when she appears. And and so then he has to cross back over to return to her, to embrace her and say, until next time, like you said, for the last time, at least as far as we know. And so this idea that, like he sees the bird, it stops raining, he sees the birds, crossing over the border freely. And then when she appears, he crosses over himself in spite of people trying to hold him back, just to be with her. And so then they have this amazing, gorgeous, heartbreaking farewell that is
Kiss
just,
and yeah.
ah,
And then he's like
ah,
dragged and they're all put in handcuffs and she's like, no.
I
Like, oh, and just one pointing out, her mom by this point has come
know.
to
Yeah.
her side and
Mm-hmm.
drives her to the border for her.
Yes.
So she now becomes the ally. And just like in the myth, in the Chinese version, the Empress is now trying to find ways to connect them in that annual tradition too.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So this is important because in some versions of the story, the parents are themselves heartbroken at the separation of the lovers, and especially the way they can keep on weeping, and so they look for ways to bring them together. And so in some versions, what you have is the parents, the mother in this case, will actually be the one to ask the magpies to form the bridge across the Milky
Mm-hmm.
Way. And so, that's how that happens. And so this is also suggested by the mother being there and trying to helping to bridge that. And she's the one who pushes Seri to go as well. I
Yeah.
think that at first Seri's not going to go, and then she says, I'll take you. And Seri's like, okay. So her mom
They
drives her. So
they jump in the car. Yeah.
yeah.
And so we find out that the captain had actually left these text messages for her, and it was like this like guide on how to continue living like he was there.
Yes. Yeah.
And so like it first he starts out by saying you're up too late,
Yeah.
and then good morning, and then he does these like pre-scheduled text messages and also like orders her a plant and tells her how to take care of the plant, and
Yep.
thus by taking care of the plant she takes care of herself,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
feeding, watering, going and being with others, etc. And there's a lot of references to Korean folklore
And
in
the lunar.
this and
Yeah.
the lunar calendar. But he gives her Edelweiss, and then the final message he gives her is this message to go and meet where in the country where it blooms, which she knows is Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
that helps her see the plan, which is not direct, like, hey, meet me in Switzerland. It's very like covert and like,
Yeah.
not direct, right?
And if you don't know, because it's, some people might not know, but Edelweiss, it's famous from the song in
Mm-hmm. Singing
um,
or in
The Sound of Music.
Sound of Music, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and in Sound of Music, it's they live in Austria, but then they end up escaping to Switzerland, and so
Yeah.
it's very closely associated with that country. And so the fact that it's Edelweiss, it's just beautiful, and it also looks a lot like a star. So
Mm-hmm. The other message is about Mulbuk, which is of course another lunar calendar reference. And she's like, I'll become a lunar calendar expert.
So what's really cool about this also is that Nabok is actually only a few days before Chisuk on the lunar calendar, which is when the star lovers are celebrated and the rains begin. So, so what you're seeing here as we go through the year and then ends with him sending the Edelweiss and telling her to come meet him is we're actually working our way up to the holiday that celebrates the herd boy and the weaver girl. So that's never stated in the story, but if you check the lunar calendar, you can see it happening.
And we have the setup of her working with the mom to kind of come up with the plan to meet in Switzerland and basically using the brother to do that.
Yes.
Which, she convinces him like, hey, what if we, took Korean or established a fund for Korean people, the children of Korean people to go ahead and go abroad and be involved in this musical conservatorship and really like took a forefront of that. That would be like such an amazing idea. And he's like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And she's like, well, if you don't have the power do that, and like really like used him in this scenario, which was so funny.
She did.
And yeah, the mom helps like by like, oh, many people are doing that and it's the thing to do. And then the sister-in-law totally jumps aboard and is like, oh, you could totally do this. This would be a big thing that you were doing as the leader of the Queen's group.
Yes, exactly. And I love it because from my perspective, and I appreciate that there are people who might think this is a reach, but I actually think this also relates back to the myth because one thing we haven't talked about as much is that it is typically magpies that join together to form the bridge for the lovers to cross. And part of the folklore is that the reason magpies are bald is because the lovers are stepping on their heads to cross. And so hilariously, at an earlier point in this show, the brother's wife here is sort of like, oh, hang on, honey, let me spray your bald spots. And so I just think it's hilarious that she uses her brother as a stepping stone, basically, to get to Switzerland. And he's balding. He's one of the magpies that she uses to cross the bridge. I just think that's really cool.
Yep. When she gets back to Switzerland, she actually is standing on a bridge. She's looking around. He's not there. She has this discussion with her mom about like, oh, are you still gonna go? And she's like, yeah, I gotta keep hope alive. And it's a little while, like maybe 2 years before she's able to kind of see him. Well, we don't actually know how long. She goes to Switzerland every year and she gets into the routine waiting for him. And this one time she's like paragliding because she is flight, she is celestial, she is one with the sky. And she falls down and she's so mad at herself because it wasn't a successful landing. It looked so rough, but there he is on top of the mountain with her, waiting for her. And he says, well, it doesn't look like you fell like all sloppily. It looked like you descended.
Yes. I love it. It's such a beautiful reunion and it's perfect and it's celestial and it's a bridge and it's sky and it's birds and it's like
the mountains meet the sky, and so they're in the in between. It's and she runs into his arms and they hug and they kiss, and then like they have the scenes of the conservatory and like how they sort of make this happen for 2 weeks every year. That's the limit of the time that they have together. And it looks like she's got a house in Switzerland that they live, and that's the end, is them just kind of living this very domestic life for their 2 weeks a year that they have together.
Yeah, it's
in amongst the clouds and next to the sky.
I know. And it's interesting to me because it it walks that line, I think, that the myth does walk, right? Which is that they're not separated forever, but they can't live their lives together. And so what I love about it is, and this is why I believe so strongly that this is so clearly an allegorical story for Korea in general, for both Koreas, is this idea that, you know, for now, this is all they have, is they can come together in moments like this, or as you talked about a little while ago, maybe the Olympics, they come
Mm-hmm.
together for a brief time, but that there are so many more forces at work that keep them separated. And so for now, they can't really be one. They can't really be together. And it's tragic, but there's this hope for a reunion. And I just think it's extraordinary that they told a story like that, you know, that they used the folk tale and the shared mythology and um, you know, all of this very clear symbolism that is easy to understand. Like even if you didn't know the myth, you would recognize what all of these symbols mean instinctively.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I just think it's extraordinary.
And like that's what we really wanted to say with this first part of talking about crash landing on you is there are ways to use folklore and mythology as inspirations for story or as sort of like scaffolding to enable a deeper element of symbolism, like because there's the straight story that's happening on the surface about a North Korean officer and a South Korean woman that yes you can enjoy, but when you layer it with mythic motifs that tie back to either other folklore or mythic stories that have happened in the past, or you're just tying it to the sort of the mode that you get into with motifs, it enables you to have this thing that resonates so much stronger in your psychology. And that's why Missy and I like love talking about this story.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because it
Yeah.
works on a variety of levels. The symbolism that everybody can recognize because it's archetypical and we can understand, you know, up high versus down low. The
Mm-hmm.
level that it connects to the specific mythology within Korea and how that also ties to tying it together as you know, not just the characters, but also the circumstances that the characters live within, and that this is a bigger story than just two humans. It is galactic in size, and
Yes.
that's the problems that they're trying to overcome too. It's
Mm-hmm.
great.
Yes. It's amazing. And I just I I think we can all tell stories like this because that's the thing too, is that, you know, we're calling this the intentional myth. We feel very confident that this is what they were trying to do because of the fact that it is right there in the texts. They refer to the folktale multiple times, and they explicitly relate these characters back to it. And then obviously the motifs just so repeating over and over and over again. And so we call it the intentional myth, but I think the important thing, and this is what we'll get into more next time as well, is that you can tap into these things without realizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Any storyteller can tap into these things without realizing it because these are the symbols that we all recognize and instinctively understand. And so it's really cool to see that happening here. And also keep in mind that if we can see this as cultural outsiders, there must be so many more layers to this. You know, for Native Koreans that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we couldn't possibly hope to understand. And so that's one thing I want to say, certainly here at the end, is please, if you have any additional insight, if you notice things that we didn't, yeah, if there's more context that you could offer, we would love to hear it, because there's clearly so much going on, and so much more than we could even cover in the time we have.
Yeah. And, we're dealing with a language barrier or a cultural barrier, and we're just not going to know everything that is meant by the storytellers, but we're over the moon that this story exists, and that it pulls so heavily onto both psychological archetypes that Missy and I are familiar with from an intended perspective based on the story itself and the mythology, but also that it ties and plugs into unintended mythology, which we are very, very excited to dig into next time in our part 2 on Crash Landing on You.
Yay! Can't wait.
All right, Missy, where can people find you if they're looking for you online? Not a lot of places anymore.
No,
we're comfortable with.
Yeah, I've retreated quite a bit, so sorry about that. But you know what? I'm still pretty active on Tumblr, so you can find me there at All Girls Are Princesses, all one word.
Yep, I am also available on Tumblr under What the Force Show. I also have a Patreon, which I tend to post more about Star Wars, but I also post about mythic motifs and how things work from an archetypical perspective and other media as well. As well as we have the What the Force Discord, where we talk about all sorts of different stuff related to story, not just about Star Wars, but feel free to just track any of those down in the liner notes if you want to reach out and see more about what I'm writing about or working on. Thanks everyone for listening, and make sure to come back for our next episode on Crash Landing on You, part 2. Cheers.